Hi, I'm your host, Kate. Welcome to Mental Health and Creativity Collide, where we explore everyday creatives. Whether you're a CEO, a chef, a death doula, or a professional actor, mental health and creativity are gifts we all have as humans. This podcast explores how our guests find balance between mental health and creativity. It is a celebration of their stories and an invitation for us to share our own. Here we go. Hi, Ben.
Hey, Kate.
Thank you so much for being here and doing this podcast with me on your birthday.
Thank you so much for having me. Wouldn't spend it any other way. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I always like to start with just a little breathing exercise so that we can be grounded, but also if folks are watching and they want to be grounded before listening to a podcast, this is one you can do, on the train in the morning. I would not recommend doing it while driving, though, just for folks who may be listening that may want to do it in the car.
Totally fine.
Taking your attention to the chest and just starting there. So as you inhale, feeling the chest expand with air. As you exhale, softening and the chest falls. Exploring that a little. So just continuing to add slow breath as you lift the chest up and down at your own pace. Seeing if it can be slow enough so that it feels luxurious, but not so slow that it feels hard to breathe. And then keeping that, you're just going to take it down to the chest. So as you inhale, down to the ribs. So as you inhale, chest expands, but so do the ribs. Space between each rib. And then as you exhale, let it soften. Great. And continuing to play with that at your own pace. So just a couple rounds like that. And if you'd like to, you can go down to the belly. So as I'm inhaling, the chest is expanding, the ribs are expanding, the belly. Great. Now, this may feel nice just to stay here. Or if not, you're going to keep this, and I'm going to add an alternate nostril option. So as you inhale, chest expands, belly, ribs. Then as you exhale, block the left nostril and breathe out through the right nostril. I'm just blocking the very bottom of the left nostril there. And then breathing in through both. Block the right nostril, breathe out through the left. And continue at your own pace. So it's just breathing in through both. Blocking the alternate nostril and breathing everything out. Even if it sounds like a bike tire, that's okay. Continuing to breathe there. I'm just going to be quiet for a few rounds. Great. And then slowly working your way so that your last exhale, I got a little zoned out myself, is through your right nostril. So last exhale through the right nostril, really breathing everything out. As soon as you've done that, just taking hands to the lap and taking a moment to notice how you feel. And there's no right or wrong answer, just to notice. If you'd like to, you can even have a mantra or an anchoring sentence to come back to inspire you throughout the time together. If you'd like to share mine, it's my all-time favorite. I am enough. I am enough. Whatever that means to you. If you like it, you can just come back to it throughout the podcast. And if you don't dig it, you don't need it. You can just focus on the breath, and we're going to start in just a moment. We'll be here for just 2 more breaths. Great. Hey, how do
Yeah,
you feel?
that was that was lovely. I feel great.
Good.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, thank you. It helps me too. To those listening, I was sharing with Ben before we started how sometimes beginning things that you really care about causes anxiety in the body, like excited nerves. But it doesn't always help with performance or with like being present. So I'm really grateful you were open to starting with the breathing too.
I'm grateful to you for suggesting it. It's a lovely practice. I'm
Thanks.
gonna adopt it. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks. Yeah, I love breathing. We can talk about that later if you'd like to. But I
Absolutely.
just want to properly introduce you. So this is Ben, COO of the network. So the community that we're all a part of, like through this podcast, but also just a really dear friend and a beautiful human, incredibly creative, and incredibly uh, conscious and intentional about their mental health and yeah, like a drummer, a philosopher, a dear friend, like so many facets of you. And I just think you're such an inspiring story. And I want to
Thank
get
you, Kate.
into those aspects, but I'm
Mm.
curious just to start with, do you have like a first memory of creativity in your life, like being a young person and being creative? And if so, what is it? Or if not, that's okay too.
Let me see. It's a great question. Um,
Oh, we just definitely heard a rat or a mouse or something.
that was fascinating. Somehow I thought it was rain,
I did,
but
yeah.
that it was kind of heavy sounding. So
I
I'm
don't
not
know
sure it
if you
was
could
lower
hear it
down,
as the
but
audience,
it was
but that was
interesting.
very, yeah. Or maybe, ooh, maybe we have like a theater spirit
I
or
think they
something.
are interested in integrating the breathing technique in their own lives.
Probably.
Cross species breathing techniques. I dig it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But I'm sorry, back to the question. Just the first early memory of creativity that comes to mind, if you feel cozy, share it.
when I was pretty young, I actually had a dream about a rat screaming. I'm just kidding. I would start writing novels. I would get like a page or two in, and then I would stop. I would move on to other things. I think
Wow.
a lot of the time when I was younger, I had a lot of energy, and I would have various interests. But
Yeah.
and it's not even a but. And I would like to switch between them, and that's how my energy felt naturally to express.
Mm.
That's okay. But I remember and I could probably find it somewhere. It was a novel about like this cave person family,
Ooh,
thousands of years ago, that kind of thing. I got like 2 pages in. I was like 5 years old. I really enjoyed it.
that's amazing that you
So
were like writing and creating
I got
worlds at
validated
5.
too. So I was happy about that.
You said you got validated? Is
It's
it?
so important. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I got a lot of validation from 5-year-old friends, my parents. That was
Wow.
really beautiful.
Do you feel like that was not to read into it, but do you think that that was a part of like how you continued to be a creative person growing up? Is that you had that validation as a young person?
I do think so. Yeah. It's it's hard to come by sometimes, like especially because I feel like, and it might not be this way for everybody at all times, but a lot of the time there are constraints placed on what it means to be creative.
Yeah.
I think like in our personal relationships, in communities, and then with institutions, like we're taught like this is creativity, this is what creativity should be. If you're not doing that, then like it's not accepted, or like you're not validated. But yeah, I had good support from an early age, and that definitely rippled forward.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about that for just a moment if you're open to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I because I think the same thing. It's one of the reasons why I like this topic for the podcast is
Yep,
I
yep.
wanted to focus on inspiring stories of creatives that I know who also focus on mental health because I think the two are so intrinsically tied.
Yes.
But the stigma on creativity, I don't think we talk about very much. And that, like for me anyway, when I think about it, I think about if you're not at a professional level caliber, whatever that means, then you shouldn't be creative at all. And that means you're not a creative person. Or like if you're A-type personality, that means you're not creative. Like those are sort of the I what I think to be untrue stereotypes that come to mind with creativity. Do those resonate, or are there other?
Completely resonates.
Yeah.
Um, I know a couple of folks who work in STEM, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm aware of at least one physicist at a top university, and these people are creative. He's creative maybe in like a different way. His ideas are not always accepted, and not even
Mm.
like until please think about something differently. Like, I mean, people are shot down. People are not always as caring as they might be. Definitely not validating
Yeah.
when it comes to something that's as organic and precious to mental health as creativity is. Um, I think when we're allowed to nourish our genuine creativity, that can be tremendously healthy, and it can feel really liberating.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like you said, we have these stereotypes as to what creativity is, and as far as we know, like that only touches the surface.
Yeah.
And like I say that just because we haven't society is such that we don't give room to explore different facets of what it means to be human all the time.
Yeah.
There is a lot of stigma in that domain. I completely agree with you, Kate.
I just love it's one of my favorite things about you because I think it's how you see the world, and we've had several conversations about this, but just the intentionality behind like the thinking that creativity and mental health are intertwined, one, but also just that like different levels of thought are both of those things as well, and like
Mm-hmm.
different ways of approaching society and culture and capitalism and like um
Here, yeah.
I mean there are so many ways we can go with it, but it's
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an element of creativity we don't talk about a lot, is to
Mm-hmm.
like think outside of the norm. And you're a philosopher as well. um,
We're, we got to do our thing. I've been lucky
yeah.
enough to know people that facilitated that.
Hmm.
Right back at you, Kate. I love philosophizing. On our walks on the beach and everything else. It's
Thank
a
you.
really really beautiful part of the time that I like to share with you. So
Same.
yeah,
But is that like was that an interest? Because this was your because what was your may I ask what your degree was it
okay.
like was it were
It
you a
was
philosophy major?
philosophy
Yeah, that's okay.
for sure. Yeah.
So well I knew you studied it,
So,
but I couldn't remember if it was your degree. What made you take that course? Like was it like how do you get from Ben writing stories about cave people at
mhm.
5 years old to Ben studying philosophy in school? Because I think they're both incredibly creative. Like I think to think philosophically, tying back into just like different levels of thought as being creative is the same thing, really, just in a different box. But
I think you're absolutely right. And I remember kind of like hints of wanting to go really abstract and philosophical in
mm.
high school. And then I took a philosophy class prior to getting the degree. I took that somewhere. Actually, no, I had taken a philosophy class in high school, but I dropped it.
Do you remember why
So
you dropped it?
yeah, I thought it was really boring, honestly.
Yeah.
And this it's the kind of thing where we sometimes we change as people, and also the way that the subject is presented can really radically transform how we take it in. It's
Yes.
so that really transforms how we're able to enjoy it if we do, or if we drop the class.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, then did
yeah,
you have a teacher that made you love it again in college or
I absolutely did.
okay.
Yeah, I remember probably more from that first class. Than basically any other class, and that was because there was ample room for questions. There's ample room for exploring what philosophy, is or can be from our
Mm.
own perspectives, which I think like is really it can be a good perspective. I don't want to say like it always can be for thinking about mental health
Yeah.
and creativity. Like, what does it really mean to be creative for each of us? And
Yeah.
then like if we really feel into that, then it's one way to not bypass, but try to get more in touch with something within ourselves that society hasn't necessarily facilitated.
Yeah.
Um, what do these things really mean to us? What is their intersection to us? And then I accidentally ended up majoring in philosophy, so that was really exciting. I think I meant to change to being a psychology major up until my junior year,
Wow.
and then I was like, well, I can still do psychology, doing philosophy, and so it ended up being philosophy of psychology,
Oh,
and
cool.
they can be part and parcel, uh, totally.
I love
So so often they have to do with the mind, with human development, creativity. There's philosophy of creativity. Clearly, there's psychology of creativity. That's a whole other thing.
that.
Uh,
Do you what drew you to psychology? Like why were you interested in that as well?
Psychology, I'd had an interest in mental health, broadly conceived, probably since middle school.
Mm.
Um,
Wow, that's really
I
young, I feel like. That's amazing.
and I think maybe even a little bit before that, although I didn't
Mm.
conceptualize it as psychology or
Mm.
as mental health. I knew that I tended to notice a lot more than I wanted to
Yeah.
in the world. I think I probably was very sensitive, maybe a highly sensitive person at an early age. And so then in high school, I started getting more interested in like what are other people saying about this kind of thing. I didn't take any psychology courses. I don't think that they were offered at the high school. But then
Yeah.
I knew like I wanted to, or I thought I knew, right, that I wanted to major.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and I ended up taking a couple of classes, but then it was like, well, I can do both through philosophy, so why not? And
Yeah. I think that's really beautiful. I man, as with you always, like there's like five things that I want to unpack in that sentence because I think it's so rich, which I love about you. But the interest in mental health, like from a young age. And also just to speak to the audience too, and I'll put links in this as well. Like a highly sensitive person, Ben and I are both highly sensitive people. And on a biological level, this is me putting it really simply. I would definitely check out the website if you're curious to learn more. But you're actually taking in more information than somebody who is not highly sensitive. I think it's about 20% of the population that has this trait. But stimuli can be like quite a lot if you're a highly sensitive person, like light, sounds, noises. So we'll have a special podcast on that later. But there was also, if you feel comfortable talking about it, something else that was going on with you, all besides being a highly sensitive person. Like, do you feel comfortable talking about your diagnosis and like when you discovered?
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to. At some point, my feelings of social anxiety started to transmute, partly because I think of my creativity into obsessive compulsive disorder.
Mm.
And I say that because a lot of the time, like with creativity, and this isn't all of it, right? I never want to put like a straight jacket of a definition around something like creativity,
Yeah.
but the kinds of connections we make can kind of like outstrip what we can handle sometimes.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and so when that kind of like co-opted the anxiety in me, so like they combined, um, basically. So social anxiety plus my creativity made me very creative at finding ways to be socially anxious. To uh,
I love that way of saying it. Yeah.
it's a way of being gentle with myself, and also I think it's actually really true.
Mm.
Um, also, I've thought about this a little bit before, right? And I felt into it a good deal. And um, the thing about like OCD for me, just insofar as I experience it, is I continually feel like there are things that need to happen, and if they don't happen, then something bad will go wrong, right? So then that's the obsessive part, and then the compulsion part of it is like, okay, well, if I do this thing, oftentimes it wouldn't make sense to other people because it's within my own personal framework. If I do this thing, then the bad thing won't happen.
Yeah.
Um, and so what happens with creativity and connection making is that there are more kinds of obsessions, um, and the frequency of like each sort increases. And then it's harder to, like, let's say I'm in a place where like I really feel like I need to put a handle on it or something like that. um then it's hard to manage that, right?
Mm.
um and it presents in different ways. There are different kinds of OCD. They're different in ways of understanding it for ourselves.
Yeah.
um I think what's really helpful is to talk with folks about like how it really feels from that internal level, or a phenomenological level. Is like, I sometimes say, it's like, what's it like from your lived personal experience,
Yeah.
outside of like how we're taught to think about and respond to these things.
I think it's generous of you to bring that up because I do think that, and tell me if you think this is off base too. But I think that OCD is one of those like particular types of labels that people like think about you checking the door
Oh
multiple
yeah.
times before you leave, and then they're like, "That's OCD, right? That's it." And like,
Yeah.
I don't think very often
Absolutely.
folks
Yeah.
know about the internal aspect of it, and I feel like it's most of the time it's internal. Actually, is that correct? Or
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think a lot of people develop masking mechanisms, right? But it takes up a lot of bandwidth. That can be tough unless, if you happen to be with like the right people, then, my nervous system at least like calms down a lot. And that can really help
yeah,
with even like the presentation of the initial obsession.
yeah.
Um,
I also love the tie to creativity, like, and how sometimes being a creative person means that like you can accelerate the effects of like if you're like both of us deal with mental illness, like sometimes it can accelerate that.
yeah, yeah.
And I think sometimes there's a it was interesting when I've been talking to people as I prepare for this podcast or as I make things having to do with mental health. People are like, yeah, so many artists deal with mental illness. It must make you more creative. Like, which came first, the mental illness or the creativity? But to
Well said.
me, and I'd love to know your opinion on this, my mental illness keeps me from being creative more than it helps usually. Like I think it provides a depth of experience and a different kind of empathy that I appreciate creatively. But
Yep.
the inability to like the days when it's hard to function, I'm like, it's hard to like, I want to make something, but I can't always. And I
hmm
wonder, does that come up for you at all? Or do you feel like you're like, no, actually, like, I feel like the two are hand in hand in a more positive way?
I think I'm leaning towards the direction that you do.
Hmm.
Um, especially, I'd say, especially given when we're in kind of contexts, where creativity is seen a certain way, or like we're told like, okay, if you're not doing this kind of thing, then it doesn't count, or it's not a good
Yes.
kind of idea. That can feed for sure into accelerating the anxiety or whatever kind of mental illness it might be. Maybe it's paranoia, maybe it's obsession, maybe maybe it's more like depressive mood, maybe it's a combination of things.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think going the other way, um, my creativity does influence, as you noted, the expression of the OCD. Also, over time, it's been interesting that it's really helped too, um,
That's cool.
in this really cool indirect way. So, like, I've been lucky enough to know individuals like yourself and others, especially over the past couple of years, that have really validated. Validation is so important. Validated kind of the expression of creativity in philosophical mediums, and in other ways. And then what that does is it feeds back into my initial worry that had started the OCD all along, which was like, you know, are people really uncomfortable
Mm.
around me? And am I doing the wrong thing? Um, is it the kind of thing that like I can uh, I can I can control or I can manage? And in that way, a third factor is empathy,
Yeah.
right? If we're highly sensitive, then sometimes we can be highly empathetic too,
Mm.
and that doesn't necessarily combine in the most pleasant of ways um, with certain kinds of mental illness.
I made a noise because I totally, you and I have spoken about this a little bit, but just for
Yes.
perspective to those listening, is I very much relate to that. Sometimes if you are an empath and a hypersensitive person and you're dealing with mental illness, I'm in the process of being re-diagnosed right now, which is a whole
Mhm.
other thing because then you like get used to a label and then you might have a new label and
Yeah.
like it can be helpful and stressful. But I relate to the are people comfortable? Like, did I make that person feel better or worse? And like the obsessive holding on to that for days or
hmm Yep.
sometimes I'll
Yep.
get a flashback of it from years like past. I'll be like,
Absolutely.
yeah, like
hmm
I had one the other day where I remembered somebody that I saw at a grocery store and I didn't feel as warm as I thought I could have. And I knew they were going through a particularly hard time. This was years ago and it just flashed into my head. And I'm like, I wonder if like I made their day better or worse and if they think of that. And like,
hmm
but that's not necessarily helpful. I don't know. Do you have any like any specific the similar things or thoughts surrounding that and like how they all interplay together?
I absolutely do. I think like as humans, like we tend to see causation a lot of the time where it's not.
Yeah.
And being empathetic, like we worry about how people are. So then we can worry about in general, like we're saying, how we cause, pain and that kind of thing in people. Um, and one of the most magical things is to like do a grounding exercise like we did at the beginning,
Mm.
because that can, for me, the internal experience is worrying, obsession, anxiety might still come up, but it's at a distance kind of from me internally.
Yeah.
So it's not blocking or taking up so much bandwidth.
Mm.
But uh yes, I think that when it comes to like the intensity of the experience of like, did I just impact this person in this way?
Yeah.
And like we're taught like, okay, um it's the kind of thing, it's hard to verbalize this, but I I think we're oftentimes, it's not promoted in us to necessarily be super like empathetic towards people.
Yeah.
It can be invalidated even, right? Or it's just not expected. More like less aggressively, like it's not expected, but a lot of the time, like I think we can be shut down as empathetic people for sure.
Yeah.
Like, yep,
The I think we've also spoken about too, especially as somebody that presents as male. I think it's
yep,
harder. Do
yes.
you? Yeah. What's that like for you? Like,
That came up for me while I was speaking. I was like, I think, comes as no surprise to anybody. Like there are kind of like set stereotypes, like you said, like you said, um, and one of those kinds of stereotypes includes, the idea that boys don't cry,
yeah.
boys aren't sensitive, ergo, like men don't cry, men aren't sensitive, this kind of thing.
Mm.
People who present as male, that it can be seen as weakness. It can be seen as like this doesn't fit. Be seen as like, well, um, that's just not how it works, or like that's a weird kind of thing. There's a lot of stigma around it. We're taught to conceal these kinds of things, um, and over a period of years, that can really add up.
Yeah.
Um, our bodies keep the unending tally, the unending score, kind
Mm.
of thing um, of these experiences, and that's not easy. Not easy.
Do you? I feel like though, to me, you're such a safe space, especially as
Thank you.
somebody like presenting male, and like
Mhm.
I value that about you so much, and you have like really strong ties to your empathy, and you are a really attuned empath and a really present person. Are there? I mean, things maybe they relate to creativity and mental health, maybe not. But like, how did you maintain that? How did you keep that as a person?
If I had to say like a few main things that helped,
Yeah.
and there are other kinds of factors that creep in, and this doesn't apply to everybody, right? This is
Yeah.
not me legislating like the process to go forward through. I actually had a number of mentors that were much more emotionally intelligent than I was,
Hmm.
and I was able to start to see in them the kinds of things that not that I could like copy, but I was like, okay, I recognize this as being something that is germinating within myself.
Yeah.
Like they do care about expressing emotions. They do care about listening to others in terms of all the kinds of ways that we can communicate, verbally, non-verbally, energetically, others, what have you. I'm not sure that there's a set list for that, but in terms of like other males, other folks presenting as males in my life, I remember a couple of different professors. One was an economics professor, actually.
Cool.
A couple were philosophy professors. One was a psychology professor.
Wow.
Most of these individuals I'm still in contact with, and they emphasized really trying to listen to people, trying to understand where each person was coming from as an individual, not as like, we just want you to, be kind of like this reduced, stereotype or collection of stereotypes, right? And among the kinds of things that they really modeled and that showed me it was okay to, act according to, were being in touch with emotions, expressing them when it's okay. Which by the way is, that phrase itself, like when it's okay, that can do a lot of damage itself. I think what I mean to say, really there is not forcing ourselves to go in any particular way, like to maintain a sense of like what's really safe or what's like, what will really serve us in our own sovereignty or genuinely like in our own bodies. It's not always going to feel like really safe to say a given thing at a given point in time. It's not an algorithm. It's more like, if we can be in touch with what we really need and what is respectful towards those that we're with, then that's helpful.
I love that. And all these professors are at the collegiate level. Is that
Yeah.
true? Yeah, that's so inspiring. I think to me too, I'm realizing like what I think. Somebody asked me how I defined wisdom in like an online Zoom storytelling meeting over the past year, and I've thought about it a lot. And
Yeah.
I think wisdom to me is somebody who can be, I think it's that innate attunement to your, I usually call it like integrity, but that like to yourself, and the ability to hear other people's opinions and to see them as people as opposed to just people you're trying to convert to your opinion.
Yep.
And I by the way, I don't mean that about any specific sect of people, because I think there's extremists in every group that do that. So like if you're like, oh yeah, like those people, I'm like, no, like everybody.
I feel like
If
it's a
that makes
pretty,
sense.
unfortunately, a human thing that is
Yes.
promoted by society a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Right? So completely agree with you, Kate.
Especially on social media, and it's like I'm right, you're wrong. There's no.
Yes.
Yes, I mean that we could go down a whole thing, but I just love that you connected that attunement to being able to listen to emotion and seeing that in male identified like professors is really cool.
In a way, I was fortunate, right? And I think when we're fortunate enough to be around folks that are like this, maybe it's empathy, maybe it's like they have similar artistic interests, creative interests. For me, like I'm weirdly into abstraction, right? Like especially when it comes to philosophy, like to really be able to validate that in ourselves and try to foster those relationships and continue mirroring between each other.
Can you elaborate a bit on that? It's like if you had to define abstraction, like it's like what about that?
Probably the biggest, well, so my creativity, I'd say, like expresses itself like interpersonally a little bit. Like it, like I was saying, like it does impact like my OCD. It can also help in terms of empathy. It can be a plus in terms of like noticing things, being attuned in general, kind of like really caring in real time about a person. When it comes to abstraction, I definitely don't have a single definition, like in general,
because it's abstract.
because it's abstract, and we can make of it kind of like it can be more of a sandbox.
Ooh.
That like, but there are no dimensions to the sandbox. Like we can just like we can play around with what abstraction is, what creativity is to an extent, like with what empathy is, maybe not even to an extent, but like when it comes to abstraction, I think for me personally, what's really beautiful is that it feels limitless. Like, and also like to recognize and also live the fact that it's a need for myself. It's a need, but it's it doesn't kind of like overshadow itself. So it doesn't. This is.
May I ask you something about it?
Yes.
Or do you want to?
No, please. That would be amazing.
Okay, cool. Okay. Well, it tell me if I'm right. Like, tell me if this resonates. I think creativity presents when we're really it as a love of something, right? Like I
Yeah, yeah.
think I love the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert.
Mm.
I tell everybody about it, but it's sort of about how everybody has creativity. But
Hmm.
one of my favorite examples in it is she speaks about a woman who loves to ice skate,
Yep.
but gave it up when she realized she couldn't be professional,
Yes.
and then came back to it later and just did it early in the morning 3 days a week just for her. And
Yes.
I think
It's amazing.
sometimes like that's what creativity is, like this is the love of it. And like, and it echoes to me when you're talking about abstraction of a similar thing, or like how I feel about playing my ukulele or playing with puppets. It's like it's just this love of something, and it doesn't even need to mean anything or have a purpose, even really, like not in the sense of
Mm.
society, like society given purpose. Like I don't need to make money with it. Like it doesn't need to be my job, like, is what I mean by that. But it's the love of it, and it makes me like a whole person. Am I putting something, like am I putting too much of myself on how you're talking about it, or does that resonate at all with you? Or
Resonates a lot. I really, I really vibe with that. I think like abstraction itself gets kind of like reduced to being a certain kind of thing in society.
ooh,
Also, and hence, like in the past, I've sort of seen abstraction through that lens, and therefore, like my creativity through that lens. Like
whoa,
if like abstraction has to be something that isn't practical, or like it
oh,
has to be like tied to theory, which then is placed in a dichotomy with like practice and action.
mm,
But I think the thing about abstraction is, at least the way I live it, like it can be tied intimately to love,
mm.
like you're saying, um, and in that way we can kind of like perform alchemy on it. It can convert into action if we so choose.
I
It's the
love
kind of
that.
thing that's incredibly flexible. It's a concept. People, you know, people don't have monopolies on what these things mean, right? I mean, they might want to, and they do want to.
Yeah. But I love
It's
that.
so human. It's so personal in a way, and but we can also like share it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So totally vibe with that, Kate.
I love the word alchemy for it.
Yeah.
Maybe we could be like, okay, I'm gonna try and be abstract with like just the use of creativity too, and even just mental health, and that
Hmm.
like valuing and spending time on the love of something, like just for the love of it, can become like can alchemize like us as people. Like when
Yeah.
I'm not creative, I am a really different human being, and for me a much less happy one. And that doesn't mean creative professionally in the labeled sense. Like
Hmm.
um does that connect with the alchemy of it? Like it's like its
It
purpose but
does.
not necessarily.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. I think I'm just elaborating on what you just said, but does that make, do you have
Nah,
any
it
other thoughts on it?
absolutely
Okay.
makes sense. And like, where what has happened, for me, like, okay, so like let's say like there's a time period where we're not being creative.
Mm,
Sometimes that energy or that creativity can kind of like come out, besides it can manifest in other ways.
yeah.
I think that a lot of um I'll just say genesis of like the OCD that I experience is because I didn't have creative outlets, or at least
Mm,
um they weren't validated by people that like I looked up to.
yeah.
Um and that can happen in other ways. Like if we're if we really love something and then we're not able to express it, right, it's not going to necessarily go away. Might even stay there. It might even percolate, come out in ways that are less than healthy,
Yeah.
maybe even unhealthy and in painful ways for me, in OCD and anxiety.
Mm.
Mm.
The and just to elaborate on that a little, you mean like the like when you're speaking about the OCD within the mind, like as we talked about earlier,
Yes.
or about like anxiety socially, or is there another element to it that I'm,
For me,
yeah.
it was definitely like if I'm not applying my creativity, in these ways, in genuine ways, then what happened um, what happened was it applied itself in other ways. It applied, or it became channeled through, what was basically like latent OCD.
Oh,
Um,
like your creativity would go into more
yeah.
like you were speaking to earlier, like more problems creatively.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, creativity, it's kind of like if we want to see it, if we want to reify it, like see it as a single thing, it can be neutral, kind of like technology in that way.
Ooh,
Like
that's
it's
cool.
like it's like it can be untapped energy. It can be the kind of thing that, like, okay, depending on the context it's in, it may or may not do a lot of good.
Ah,
Just because somebody's creative doesn't mean, I mean, you can be a creative evil genius,
yeah.
right? You can and especially like in society where people don't necessarily like promote creative avenues
Mm,
or value creativity monetarily, and like you were saying, tend to like see it through certain kinds of like professional stereotypes,
yeah.
and at this point like memes and tropes.
Well, and to echo back to something you said earlier, is like valuing is so important of this.
Yep.
And one of the reasons why I'm so into the network is it values those non-conventional like levels of creativity and mental health, while also like educating and breaking the stigma on mental health. And if you're
Yes.
okay, I'd love to segue into like you're the COO, the Chief Operating Officer. Looked that up for everybody listening.
It's an honor. It's good to be working with you too, Kate.
Yeah, no, but
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about like how did creativity and mental health present taking on this new role? Like you used to write grants, like
Mhm.
you were a philosophy major. Like what has been your journey to this role, and like what's great about it, what's hard about it? Like
Mhm.
anything you wish to speak to, and then I asked you a lot of questions in succession, so I can ask them again too. So whatever you latched onto is great.
It's a beautiful thing. I may go down a couple of different tangents or even like an
Great,
entire rabbit warren of tangents.
do it.
But I think the beautiful thing about working here
Hmm.
is that seeing things from a systems level, or seeing, the entire forest, if we choose to, different departments intersecting together, um, and also at more granular tactical or operational levels, if we so choose to. Um, and I find that to be especially beautiful because a, it's an expression of the need I have to be relatively abstract,
Hmm.
but then b, because proactive prevention and um, empowering a network of allies uh, to be able to disrupt the highest risk factors for mental health in their own spheres of influence
Yeah.
at their own intersections. That's the kind of thing that hasn't been done before, and I'm absolutely honored to be able to help and apply my love for systems thinking and creativity in that avenue.
Yeah.
Um, so I definitely, and you asked a couple of other
No, yeah,
questions
that's really
there.
exciting. No, so
So
okay, so you started as a philosophy major. And
absolutely,
then I know that you were a grant writer, but did you jump
mhm.
straight from being a philosophy major into being a grant writer?
I
Is
did. There
okay,
was there were like a couple of stutter steps in there, but that was the macro structure.
cool.
I thought about going back to grad school for philosophy. That might still happen. We'll see.
Yeah.
Prediction is hard,
Yeah.
especially when it's about the future, as the great Dane Niels Bohr said. Right. But yeah, I went into grant writing. I always had an interest in sort of like organizational thinking. Seeing the whole system evolve over time
Mm,
according to what the given organization is trying to do
yeah.
in the space of like what other organizations are doing, that kind of thing.
Well, and from my very basic understanding of both of those jobs, not having been either of them, the ability to write a grant, I feel like when speaking with you about it before, is being
Hmm.
able to like see the mission and the whole of the company and be able
Hmm.
to present that on an emotional but also a tangible level
Yeah.
to folks interested in donating. And I feel like that's sort of what like you're doing now. It's just that you're assisting the people like within the organization
Hmm.
operate as a whole. Is that accurate, or are you like, okay, no, that's so off base? Like what?
It's totally accurate.
Okay.
You put it beautifully and succinctly and elegantly. Yeah. It's like having an eye um, for different. First of all, having an eye uh, for the fact that we're human beings in these roles, and it's important to be able to listen
Mm.
to each other. And as a mental health organization, um, honestly, that should be more. That should be the standard. That should be what everybody presupposes.
Yeah, man.
Unfortunately, like a lot of the time, I think um, this is something I've heard from people. Our passions, our talents are kind of like, reduced to being able to fulfill functions at like a breakneck
Yeah.
pace, and yet, we still deserve regard as human beings. Our creativity still deserves that regard, and ultimately, it's unsustainable if we don't place these kinds of values on each other.
Yeah, so I've worked for 6 nonprofits over my span as a
It's a
creative
lot more
person.
than me.
Well, I mean, like, as an independent contractor, so with that caveat, but I am always shocked at how, and I'm not gonna name names, but, like, and
Mm, mhm,
I because I always think too, like, their mission is amazing, and like the content that they're producing, all of them is
mhm,
incredible and it's world changing.
mhm,
But on an internal level, nobody's valuing their mental health.
mhm.
People are super overworked, and like you said, if you don't deliver in a really specific monetary way, like you're out. And
Yeah.
something I valued about, and I'm not being, for those listening, like I'm not being paid to say this. Like this is just, I'm excited to be a part of this community. Like if you're listening on the Twitch channel or in the Discord channel, like tell me about why you're excited to be here. I'd love to talk with you about it. I'm here.
Woo.
Woo. But it's community based, both for the community, but also like
Mhm,
when I approached you with this idea, you're like, yeah, great. Like let's be creative together. And both you and Carl and everybody else that I've worked with, Rick, Sean, and the other content creators are
mhm,
all like yes anding. And also like when people say like, hey, I need a mental health break, or like, hey, like the communication's just so high, and like that's a valid enough reason for somebody to take a moment. And that's, I've never worked with that before ever, and it's so gorgeous. And there's so much trust too. It's like, yeah, we trust you'll get it done. Like if you say you'll get it done, we trust you'll get it done, and that's beautiful and takes a lot of extra work off folks, I think. Although I think you and Carl are working a lot more than a lot of people right now. Like how are you handling the mental health aspect of being a part of like this new community that's growing just at the beginning? Like, yeah, how's your mental health doing with it? What do you do to take care of yourself creatively and mentally?
I feel like the beautiful thing about it is that I've known a lot of the folks that I do have the honor of and pleasure
Mm.
um, of working with now. Um, so I have that background. I know like it's okay to talk about like certain kinds of things. Like, okay, maybe one of us is having a tough day. Maybe it's hard to get something done like right away, but like the communication is there and the respect for each other as persons, as human beings, as ultimately like creative beings, that is presupposed, and it's built into the structure of it, um, in the sense that, yeah, we're transparent about our finances, but we're also, and this is something that can and probably needs to happen in a lot of other kinds of nonprofits. We're transparent about how we treat one another,
Yeah.
how we it's it's not radical honesty, it's just honesty.
Yeah.
It's just like, if we're not having a good day or something like that, like how do we know that we're representing like what it is to be a mental health nonprofit?
That's so beautiful.
And that applies across different kinds of organizations. Different, it could be sustainability, it could be a corporation, this kind of thing. Like, it's so illogical to mistreat people
Yeah.
because you're like disinvesting in like what you think that you're investing in.
Yeah.
You're undermining like functionality, and then more importantly, you're undermining the person's health and livelihood. But ultimately, like, it it's premised on respect,
Yeah.
respect for the dignity of the individual, respect for each other as human beings,
Mm.
um, and respect for each other's creative processes. Like, to be able to give that breathing room, I think, is essential for letting it grow, letting it really grow and flourish.
Oh yeah, man. I love that response. I just I think it's really a really rare and beautiful way to approach like organizational cohabitation or whatever we want to call it. But
Mhm.
I'm curious how, so that's how like I feel like that really speaks to like the mental health aspect of the organization and the honoring of that. Like do
Mhm.
you have like consistent creativity in your job? If so, what
Mhm.
does that look like?
Yeah. I think first of all, it's really beautiful to be able to creatively breathe creatively, I'll say. Like
Mm.
to be able to voice ideas like freely.
Yeah.
It's such a huge thing and it can be so rare. Like especially like starting out with an organization and building conceptual frameworks, building ideas, not totally from scratch, because we know that proactive prevention is mapped out, it's field tested. It's basically just waiting in the wings
Yeah.
um, for communities, individuals, and institutions to adapt it.
Can you speak a bit more to that really quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So proactive prevention boils down to addressing the highest risk factors for mental health crisis
Mm.
prior to prior to different sorts of crisis,
Mm.
whether that's suicidal action, suicidal ideation, more overt kinds of behavior.
Mm.
Um, a lot of the time, and to speak personally a little bit too, we start to struggle internally, and people notice that something is up, but they don't necessarily know like this is tied to what could become a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
So what proactive prevention is about is trying to is delivering effective tools for you know um, prior to the point of escalation of these kinds of mental health issues, mental health struggles. So in the case of OCD, like that also means we as individuals, as friends, as family members, as loved ones, having the language to be able to talk about this.
Mm.
And maybe that involves the use of metaphor. Maybe that involves having other kinds of vernacular and concepts. I think a lot of the time, most centrally, it involves being able to ask questions um, and not placing judgment on what's going on in ourselves
Yeah.
and with the other. So having that kind of safe space, not just with other people, but internalized stigma is so real
Yeah.
that a lot of the
Yeah.
time our own minds are not safe, our own bodies don't feel safe because we've been taught that it's not safe to talk about what we're going through.
I really resonate with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll share more as the podcast goes on, but I've been to the brink of suicide with that before, and I think internalized stigma is definitely a huge part of my not coming to understand what was going on in my own mind and body
Mm-hmm.
for many
Mm-hmm.
years. But I think, but yeah, it's so exciting that the network is a part of that, like preventative, like education and conversation and community.
There's the creative aspect of
Yeah.
it, which is actively exploring what mental health means for ourselves
Mm.
too. Um, being proactive as an organization internally is really magical, because what are we doing if we're not, walking the walk,
Yeah.
right? But also it's the kind of thing that we know works. It's the kind of thing that, seen through a myriad of different kinds of intersections, different populations, reflected in the actions, in the faces, in the imaginations of a lot of different people.
Mm.
It's really resonant, partly because it meets people where they're at. It doesn't reduce to given categories of what mental illness is thought of,
Yeah.
which is not throwing shade at
No.
given institutions. It just means that mental health crises are accelerating on a variety of fronts, and there are things that we can do that we know work, that when it comes to proactive prevention, um, we as individuals, communities, and societies can grow into and start acting in these ways.
That's beautiful. I love the thought that like creativity comes to focusing on the fact that like it's different for everybody. So like of course when
Absolutely.
creating an organization, it should
Yeah.
be it should be creatively designed to be malleable to an
Hmm.
individualistic experience. Does that feel accurate or is that
Yeah.
cool?
Yeah. It's like a model for how we can interact, and so we
Yeah.
do that internally. It just makes sense, right?
Hmm.
So
Do you feel like that's where your creativity like starts to pulse most like within the organization right now, or like you're also helping like lots of different people make lots of things like throughout the organization? Like when you're thinking about like your creative, like I
Mhm.
think of like the word heat or pulse, like what does
Yeah.
that look like for you? Like where's your heat in the organization creatively?
I think for me, it really involves coming up with the kinds of systems that help keep everything organized, because
Cool.
we have, right, a number of different divisions, number of different parts. They're all intersecting. There are a lot of unknowns at this point as far as um, who's going to adopt proactive prevention in what communities and institutions when.
Hmm.
So like being able to keep how we're thinking about things really flexible, but also, and so in that way, kind of like an organism, right? It's a living organism, it's a living system, it's very organic, it's an ecosystem. So being able to regard it as that way, which is true, I think, by the way, is a tremendous outlet and natural expression for my personal creativity.
Cool. Do you feel like abstraction and like your love of that is kind of coming into play? Like
Yeah,
then?
it's facilitated, and
Mm.
it's like the kind of people that that work here listen in a way and regard each other as people that are creative beings.
Hmm.
And that's not to be taken lightly, but it's also the kind of thing that can become more normalized.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that I think is really needed across various kinds of organizations.
Yeah. Next level, next level.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like um I wanted to talk to you just about like along the lines of your creativity. You're a drummer and you're very musical. Like what is
Thanks, Kate.
yeah, what type of role does music have in your creative life as a person?
I'm lucky enough to be able to play sometimes in a suburb of Chicago called Evanston. Happens to be where I grew up. Spent a lot of time there, but I mainly do drumming there. And then one unifying factor between drumming and keyboard is just like I love the notion of phrasing, like being
Ooh.
able to like know what to play when, how dynamics obviously comes into that, but like with drumming especially, there's so many, and it applies to keyboard and other instruments, right? There's so many like little things one can do, and if you're with the right people, if you're jamming with the right people, or talking with the right people,
Mm.
it's just incredible to co-create in that way, where like you can build together. So phrasing for me, that musical phrasing is absolutely huge. I adore that process.
That's cool. It echoes to me like what you were even just talking about, like within the network and
It's
your role
incredibly
there.
musical. It's a musical process,
Cool.
right? And that, I guess, says something about how creativity manifests for me as an individual too. This is really insightful, Kate.
That's
Thank you.
beautiful. No, thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's a gorgeous way to view the world, and like I love all the layers of it. I think that's very I think it's gorgeous. Uh, I do. As we like near the end, so
Mhm.
we're about to go into your creative offering for those listening. If
Mhm.
you're just tuning in with the audio version right now, you'll be able to hear Ben. But if you're on the Twitch channel or the Discord channel with us, we'll also do a Q&A after
Mhm.
we share the art as well. But what are you going to share with us today and why?
I think creativity is a delicate thing. It's also the sort of thing that can remain in us even after different kinds of institutional, societal, personal trauma that pushes it down.
Mm.
So is hope. Um, so I'll be reading a poem by Emily Dickinson,
Oh,
entitled "Hope is the Thing with Feathers."
you're one of my favorite people. I'm so excited for this. I love Emily Dickinson. I'm really excited about this. Before we leave though, like how can people, if they want to support you, like, I mean, are you going to be present on the Twitch channel, like with folks? Are you on social media? You're like, nope, check out the website though. Like, how can people support you or connect with you
I'd
either
say
from a
all of the
yeah.
above. I
Okay.
mean, you nailed it, Kate. Yep, we're gonna be doing a lot on Twitch. This
Mm.
podcast itself will have its home on Twitch, along with a number of other shows. A lot of our content will be on TikTok as well. It's a tremendous creative medium. Um, Check out the website, obviously, hopeforusnetwork.org. And if you'd ever reach out to me personally. I love talking with people about this kind of thing.
Beautiful.
Please. Yeah.
That's so generous. Thank
Hmm.
you. Um, Great. So, with that, we'll just end with if there's like one sentence of something that you would like to leave folks with, I'd like to give you the opportunity. If you're like, no, I feel like I've said it all, that's okay too.
Um, I'd say what you began with, I am enough. I'd
Mm,
say that can generalize to abstractify a little bit,
mm,
such that my variety of creativity is enough.
mm. I love that. Thanks, Ben.
Your variety of creativity is enough,
That's
by the way.
beautiful.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I feel very inspired by that. I hope.
Couldn't have said it without you, Kate. I appreciate
Thanks.
everybody.
I hope everybody listening feels inspired too. Like I said, we're about to do just a closing breath work as well. So if you'd like to participate, you can. We'll share Ben's art, and then we'll be in the Q&A on the Twitch channel, which if you don't know which Twitch is, check out the link in the comments below. It's free to join. It's an amazing platform. I think it's the best version of social media.
Right there with
Personally,
you.
I'm a
Yeah.
huge fan. But so please check it out if you're interested in joining us live next time. But let me just great. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and just I'm going to guide you through an optional meditation, and you can listen to me, zone me out, or even like skip this part if you'd like to.
Beautiful.
But just coming into either a cozy seat, or you can lay down if you're in a space that you can be that comfortable. And your eyes can stay open or closed. It's whatever makes you feel safe and good in the space. And I'm just going to guide you through a sensation meditation. So the goal is to focus just on sensations within the body for this time, to let thoughts have a break. If they come in, though, no judgment. We're all human, and that's going to happen. That's okay. Um, but taking your attention to the inside of the mouth and just noticing what sensations come up there for you today. So maybe you'll notice like the tongue is tingly, or perhaps it's cool or warm. You may notice the temperature. There's no wrong answer, just to notice. Taking the attention to the crown of the head, noticing what sensations arise there for you today. So, again, maybe you notice a temperature, perhaps a totally different sensation comes to mind, maybe nothing. That's okay too. And then moving down to the jaw and noticing the right side of the jaw, and the left side of the jaw, what sensations arise there in the body. The space between the eyes, notice if you were crinkling your nose. Maybe not. Maybe it's very open there. And then taking your attention to the front of the throat and the back of the throat. Just noticing what sensations come there. And your breathing can just be whatever it is naturally. You don't need to affect it at all. And then moving down to the chest. Maybe you notice your heartbeat, and maybe not. Moving to the back of the chest and taking in the sensations that may come there. And it's okay if you don't catch all the sensations too, just taking in what comes naturally. And then taking in the right shoulder all the way down through the right fingertips. What sensations arise there in the body? And maybe the right bicep feels different than like the right thumb or the right palm, just to notice. And then taking in the left shoulder all the way down through the left fingertips. What sensations arise there? Perhaps they're different than the right side. And moving down to the front of the ribs and the space between the ribs and the back of the ribs. And going down to the belly and just letting it be soft for a moment. Maybe it rumbles like mine, or maybe it's very different. And going to the low back and the pelvis. Maybe you notice how heavy the pelvis is. Maybe not. And then taking in the right hip all the way down through the right toes. What sensations arise there today in the body? Maybe one element is more talkative than the other. So maybe the right thigh is talking, but the right calf is still, or something totally different. And then taking in the left hip all the way down through the left toes and noticing what sensations are there, perhaps how they're different than the right side. And then taking in the whole body as a field of sensation. So noticing the sensations inside the body, noticing the sensations outside the body, and noticing how alive and amazing and enough you are just by being here, just by being alive today. I'm just going to be quiet for a couple breaths in this space, and then I'll let you know when we're at time. All right, we're going to move slowly into Ben's creative offering. You can pause and come back to it or keep listening, whatever feels most supportive. Thanks for trying that with me if you decided to. Here we go.
This is a poem by Emily Dickinson called Hope is the Thing with Feathers. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never, in extremity, it asked a crumb of me.
Hey!
Hello.
All right, everybody. Hi, it's Kate and Ben here live. We're just going to adjust this so that you can see us a little bit better. There we go. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I just wanted to address first, we didn't mention our pronouns. That was a huge oversight on my part. So I'm she, her, hers.
Hey, y'all. Ben here. Pronouns he, they.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to start up if there are any thoughts or feedback that you had, something that we didn't talk about that you're like, I wish you would have addressed this, or anything along those lines. Please just put it in the comments, and then we'll chat about them. And then the other thing I just want to say is like, this is a new community, and we really want you to be an active part of it. So if this is a podcast that you want to listen to regularly and you're thinking like, oh, I love it, but also I wish that you would have asked this question. I wish it functioned more like this. I have thoughts on time. I have thoughts on style. We want to know all those. We value your opinion and they'll be listened to. Yeah. So I'm going to pull up the comments just so that I can see that. Oh, we have one. Great. Oh, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Right back at you. You're the best too.
Same. Yeah. We were talking about how awesome you are before we went live, actually.
Literally right before we
yeah,
went live.
it's true. Yeah. So Ben, I kind of wanted to open up with just, we didn't really talk about your creative or mental health heroes. Yeah. And I was curious if anybody comes to mind of people that you're like, I really admire these people in this arena. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They definitely be people that have been in my own life, right? I look up to certain people that I haven't known, like, but I won't talk about them so much. The person who mainly comes to mind is a psychoanalyst that I knew a number of years ago. And it's kind of like his respect, his ability to listen and encourage me to put things in my own terms is really, really admirable, because so often, like, not just concealment culture and stigma, but we're really not taught to listen to our own lived experience as our own lived experience, right? We're taught to see it in other terms, in terms of behaviors, cognitive states, things that we might not totally like vibe with, but like those are the only tools that we have for actually understanding what we're going through. Yeah. Like, so he really emphasized listening to myself, and his mirroring and listening to me helped me do that. The other person I'd say would be a psychology professor. Shout out Dr. Carazia from the College of Worcester, my alma mater. I've never actually used the word alma mater before that I can recall.
Alma mater. It's like
beautiful human being. Basically, Dr. Carazia was able to see students in a way that let us express ourselves intellectually, which is never like something that we can express abstracted away from emotion, right? Because we're curious beings. That's how we become intellectual. That's how we pursue ideas. That's how we write. And so for him, it was like, let's try to, express ourselves more as people rather than just like fitting into these strict guidelines.
I love that. Kind of something like I'm hearing, well, and we'll get to the comments too in just a second because they're really great. But the something that I'm hearing from both of those is like the ability to listen to yourself and like what it is to be you.
Yes.
What is listening to yourself look like? Because I feel like for me anyway, it took me a long time to know what like my inner voice was.
Yes.
And I feel like I use that both as a guide to taking care of my mental health, but also a guide to like how I should be creative or how I want to be creative. Does that feel true to you? And if so, like, how do you listen to yourself? Like, what does that look like?
It does feel good to me. It does feel true to me. And the phrase like what it means for me to be creative versus like how I should be creative is something that you really did an amazing job of guiding. And when we were talking last time, and
you did a great job responding. I was like, yes, I did.
It takes two. I couldn't have done it without you, Kate. I think like we're taught like, creativity needs to be this kind of thing, but like then are we really listening to ourselves, or are we listening to like how creative expression can be an expression of love for ourselves, or kind of like being in a way which is more and more genuine, because it's hard to go from like 0 to 1, from like not being genuine or like living completely within, say, a culture of concealment, and like if we have to do these things, we have to express ourselves in these isolated, bifurcated, siloed ways, all the way from there to like, I'm completely genuine. I'm completely free. I've gotten out of Plato's cave, right? I'm in the light. Like, I don't think it's from 0 to 1. We can go to like 0 to 0.3 and then back to 0.1, oscillate back and forth.
Yeah.
It takes people mirroring what it is to listen for us to be able to listen to ourselves. Just a little bit of what I'd say about that.
Oh, I think that's very cool. Also, like pertaining to your heroes, and like that's really cool.
Yes.
I think something that comes to me along those lines is like I love to color at night. Like I love to like do color in the lines.
Yes.
And for years, I felt guilty about that. Like it was a waste of time, or like I wasn't like that wasn't creative. You know what I mean? And so, but such a silly, like weird stigma that I placed on myself. And yet some nights that's really what my I want to call it like my integrity, like what I really want to do and what's going to make me feel fulfilled and creative as a person.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah. But like, I think part of the reason I used to get down on myself for is because sometimes I sell my art or like other people watch it. And like with coloring, nobody's watching you, and I'm clearly not going to sell it. And it's just for me. And I think that took me a long time. Do you have anything like that or anything similar that you're like, does it bring anything to mind?
Whenever I write philosophy or read philosophy, which kind of invariably involves writing alongside what I'm reading, either in the margins of the book or in like a notepad if it's like an article online.
Yeah.
The reading involves a creative process. The writing does too. Like I'll draw, right? I'll do diagrams which represent the different, philosophical, maybe thesis, antithesis, synthesis, something like that, or any other thing, right? So it's really like, how can I convey as closely as possible externally as, to what I'm actually experiencing from the inside, phenomenologically, as it were, like is what my lived experience is. And that can be a creative process, because I think like we're not always taught that like, doodling or something like is a legit way to convey ideas or like express ourselves. But like that can literally be what is most genuine and what actually feels creative. Just depends on the person.
Yeah.
Just depends on the person.
100%. 100%. Just want to double check. Let's see. Oh, thank you so much, Quartzful, for your comment. that's really lovely. Thank you so much. Really appreciate
lovely
it.
comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Well, and also like, and this is so funny because it's dangerous, right? Like, but I don't want to say that the purpose is to make something great. But oftentimes, when I'm doing those things that I view as like not as valuable, it gets me in a flow state, and then I problem solve like nobody's business. Or I feel like that's how like a lot of great discoveries have happened. Like, right, you're sitting under an apple tree, like
People, many physicists have played violins in order to come up with, I don't know, say the special theory of relativity.
Yes.
Right. This kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's not, there are various ways to do this, and it's like listening to ourselves, and sometimes if we let ourselves be simply by being, then we can know ourselves best, and then we can find out what creativity means for each of us.
Yeah, and I feel like the love of things sometimes opens us up.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're listening and you feel like posting in the chat and you have something that you love to do, or like a creative habit or a mental health habit that you really enjoy and you'd like to share it, please feel free. We'd love to hear what you do. Oh, yes, not off topic. These are rocking chairs. They do rock. We can rock a little for you. But the greatest thing about them is that you can lean back like this.
Dang. Yeah. This is amazing.
You have to trust, because it feels like you're going to fall back. But they're called, yes.
I'm staying back here. Oh my goodness.
This is a great chair to be creative in. So I do a lot of my coloring.
I can do stretching it. Yeah,
I got these at an REI garage sale. They're called Stargazer chairs. And if you don't know what the REI garage sale is, you have to check it out. They have it every 3 to 6 months. But if somebody bought something at REI and didn't like it and bring it back, they sell it at the garage sale for a substantial discount. And oftentimes, like with these, there's nothing wrong with it. So you can just go.
Yeah, these are perfect.
Yeah, so I recommend it. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I can't go back. This is my couch now.
Great question, Dan.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit too, Ben, about just like I feel like habits are so helpful for me anyway. It's like whenever I'm listening to a podcast, I'm like, what habits does this person have that like are helpful to them? And whether it's something that I want to apply or just something I'm really curious about, maybe. But like, do you have any habits for yourself, for your mental health, or for your creativity? Like every Tuesday I do this, or in the morning I do this with my coffee, etc.
I don't have habits that are structured according to like time, or that that are framed in like a particular way. I do, like, especially if I'm with people, then I know how to I think I know how to check in with myself. Like, am I falling into old kind of old grooves from old relationships, old kinds of work? Yeah. Can I strengthen these habits so that like if I get stuck in a groove that isn't so pleasant or isn't so amenable to who I really am, then I can switch out of that. And that can mean gently kind of allowing myself to come back to who I am, or come back to a more embodied place or creative place or philosophical place. And it can mean simply like not like legislating to myself, okay, I have to do this right now, or I have to be a certain way, otherwise like all these bad things are going to happen. Yeah. Which is the way that a lot of the time, I don't want to say all the time, but a lot of the time that's the way OCD kind of like is structured in the mind. Do this, otherwise bad stuff is going to happen. And that's a normal part of human experience. Like in a way, it can just be a lot for some people, like some of the time. And that's when it becomes more something that we can identify earlier and kind of like come to grips with earlier on.
I love that. Is it are you able to do that like in the middle of conversation? Like I know, because that's pretty impressive.
I mean, to the extent that I think I can do it. Like, am I doing it fully? I don't know if it, but I do try.
I love that. For me, sometimes I get overwhelmed in the conversation, but I know I feel funky.
Yep.
So I'll go to my favorite thing is I love to go to the bathroom, and I just like take a few minutes there and I just think everybody
who doesn't know this about me thinks that I pee a lot, but it's I think it's helpful for me to step away sometimes. But you can just do it like internally in the moment. Did you have any journey to like develop that skill set?
I have a really dear friend. Her name is Sue, incredible polymath science fiction writer, and she taught me a little bit about heart math at one point.
Heart math. Tell us about heart math. That sounds amazing.
I am not an expert in heart math by any means, but the way that I've kind of like come to embody it and come to use it is imagining breathing through my heart, like literally just like, and what does that mean to me? And it can be incredibly calming. Like, I don't know what like the alchemy or the magic that goes on there. I mean, it's some kind of like biological process and how we associate breath with the heart, with being calm, something like that, right? But that really works for me. And part of my mental health journey, as it were, began with that. Like, she really helped me figure out how to be able to do that in real time. And then sort of other things have grown out of that, like central trunk, if you will. Other kinds of branches, other variations on those branches, other leaves, what have you. I know you're into heart math also.
I think so. I love the terminology. I'm gonna use it.
It's very interesting. Yes.
But I definitely think, I mean, like the heart does so much, but it's also like just from, I'm a trauma sensitive yoga teacher, so my brain immediately goes to I think the physiology to the emotion, because I think they're both so interlaced. But the breath is like the one thing we can control, and it does slow our heart rate down. Like or the one thing in our like autonomic nervous system we can control, and it slows our heart rate down. And so like the breath to heart math is something that I think I don't know if I have like a solid opinion or thought on it right now, but I just love that the like fact that we can breathe. Although I will say sometimes I teach breathing a lot, and people are like, breathing makes me more stressed out. And it took me time to get there, because when I don't know about you, I'd love to know your journey with heart math, but when I first started breathing, I was prone to anxiety attacks, and I didn't know how to breathe yet. So I'd breathe really deeply and then start having a panic attack. I did that a lot in yoga classes when I first started, which was horrible. And I don't think people talk about those experiences a lot, of like the journey to get to the ability to breathe to heart. But we've all had them, and like we've all. I don't know. Does that make sense, Wayne?
It does.
On a tangent. Okay.
It makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
And I love the vastly more learned perspective you're bringing to it, relating like the physiology to the emotion and this kind of thing. I think like something for me, that I've experienced is like it can be, and I've had panic attacks in the past. Also, but like over time, sometimes we can cultivate more of a sense that like these things often do end.
Yeah.
Or like I know that like I'm having trouble breathing, or my heart rate is really fast right now, or like in the case of OCD, I know that like it really feels like these bad things are going to happen. But just for me personally, it's not like this is always going to work for everybody, but like over time, sort of like I've developed a little bit of a distancing ability from it, which is sometimes what people talk about, like when it comes to mindfulness meditation. So it's not a magic wand. It's not, like something that is a be all end all sort of thing. But for me personally, like heart math, and then, mindfulness based meditation, some other things kind of in that general constellation, those have really helped with knowing that like, this is sort of more like something that is passing, and it actually feels like that. I'm not just like saying that, like there's like this embodied knowledge that like this is going to pass, or this is momentary, as it were.
Yeah, everything changes. I love that.
It's the only thing that doesn't change. One could say that everything changes. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's what was so hard, or for me anyway, or what I think it can be so hard about being a young person is like you haven't gotten to go through that cycle multiple times yet.
Yep.
or I remember how much harder it was before I knew I was dealing with mental illness.
I recognized this person.
Hi, you. I love that your day's grieving.
Jiggly.
Yeah.
Love that too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
No, but before I knew like what kind of mental illness I was dealing with, like I just thought that was what life was like, and I didn't know it would get better.
Yep.
Do you remember? I don't think we talked about this. How old were you when you found out that you interacted with OCD?
I actually completely disagreed with a therapist when I was a sophomore in college.
Really?
I was like, this is not OCD. You're completely misunderstanding me.
Yeah.
Whereas, at this point, I don't know. It's some combination of learning more about how OCD can manifest and like how it's manifested for other people, and then self-understanding also.
Yeah.
So I can see more like how it combines. Like, I had this idea at the time that what I experienced was just so different, and in a way, like it was, because it was unique, right? I'm not like a clone of anybody. To that extent, it was very different, but also the form of experience or like the structure of it can repeat over time, like for different people with OCD, right? It's the obsession, like I need to do this right now. Sometimes that can be really frequent. Otherwise, or that's the compulsion, right? In answer to the obsessive thought or feeling or mental state more generally, that if you don't do it, then it's going to happen.
Yeah. How old were you when the term resonated with you?
Probably 26. So I had the formal diagnosis for like 3 or 4 years at that point.
Yeah.
And different forms of anxiety had always been a thing. But even for anxiety, and I think like within some classification frameworks currently used in psychiatry, OCD is placed within the anxieties more generally. I didn't know that things could be different on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-to-moment basis, on a conversation and person-to-person basis. I didn't have a frame of reference. Like I can feel very differently. Like if I am around different people, or for a long time I was on different psychiatric medications, or learning about heart math and meditation and other things, and like embracing my own variety of being somebody who's relatively highly sensitive. This kind of thing really helps. Going back to what you were saying, like we just don't know that it can be different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Always.
Yeah. It looks like we have a comment too. So let's see. It says, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I relate to that.
Thank you for sharing that, Christine. Yeah. Yeah. For me too, I was 25 before I realized I was dealing with mental illness and pretty severe PTSD. And then I was originally diagnosed with persistent depressive disorder, but I'm still in re-diagnosis, which is also something I don't think we talk about. Is like I was so like not I felt such relief to have something that I could be like, no, this is what it is. So I could like, and then when that was taken away, that was really hard. And then nobody talks about that too, is like people begin to identify you with a certain label. And so like I'm in that process right now. I'm 31 years old, about to be 32, so it's just this like also like your lived experience. I think once like going back to what you were saying, like, oh, but everything's in a cycle and it all changes, and like also like not good or bad, if that makes sense. Like I think like the older I get, the more tools I have in my tool belt, and also I'm less attached to the idea of just like things are good or things are bad. It's like life is life and it's a cycle.
I think it can be really helpful to over time like talk with folks that have different perspectives on what it means to relate to our mental states and diagnoses. Like people have talked to me about OCD, and it's helped me destigmatize it for myself. Yeah. Actually, and stop seeing, well, for just me personally, right? Not attaching so much of like a value valence to it. Like this is really good at this, really bad. Yeah.
Yeah. I love too. We just got the comment. I just thought I was able to tough stuff out. Yeah, I really resonate with that. Me too. I was like, yeah, if I just put on a brave face and like, I do love to smile. Like that's natural, even when I'm not feeling great. Like I share it in my show, but like I
It's
once
lucky
said,
for all of us.
well, it's nice. It's like I don't think we talk about like how a person could be smiling and also be having a hard time. Like,
Yes.
I think there's one example in particular that I share in my show, but an Uber driver told me I couldn't be depressed because I smile all the time. And I was like, one, we've been in the car 3 minutes, but two, I do think that's actually something that people think about with me a lot. But yeah, it's like, you never know what somebody's going through. Yeah.
I relate to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time I still feel like I can tough it out, to go off of what, one person has said in the chat.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not. And to be open to that, like to be open to expressing things, and also, nurturing the kinds of relationships which allow us to be more proactive in exploring our own mental health. Like if people, going back to what we were talking about at first, people give us the space to like really listen to ourselves and not falsify what we're experiencing. And also, if they're listening to us like in a genuine way, it'd be really transformative. And then, being labeled as too sensitive, too intense, too much. You're too excited right now. Tone it down. Like even like I've gotten that like in meetings with folks where it's like, I'm really excited about something. This is years ago, by the way, like 4 or 5 years ago. It's like that can really, build stigma in ourselves for, we start to internalize that. And then if we're already sensitive, then we're sensitive to what the other person is saying. We're sensitive to how they're doing. And then we tend to, take what they're saying to heart, and that doesn't help our mental health.
Yeah, it's like it goes deeper. It's like you're in the you're like going pretty deep down into the cavern at that point. I feel like.
Yep.
I resonate with too sensitive too, or like I don't know if this is in every state, but like she's a soft touch. Like, did anybody say this or like?
I'm curious about
Ben's
this.
A soft touch.
I might have a feeling about this. Can you say more?
It's just, I think it's just like another way of saying you're too sensitive. It's like, that person has a soft touch. Like they're like, but that one was a lot, was brought up a lot.
I feel that good.
And also like who decided that these things were negative in the first place too, just like that layer of culture too is interesting. It's like sometimes I think we comment about what we want more of ourselves, like I think that, and we've talked about this a little bit too, even we touched on it briefly, but just like jealousy too. I think sometimes jealousy is an indicator, not a negative thing, but just an indicator that you want something. And like maybe if we were better at like listening to the integrity or doing hard math, we would all be able to like know what we wanted more, or like be more sensitive and open in ourselves.
Maybe sometimes when we're jealous or like we're feeling really extreme envy or anger, it's an indicator that like there's something that we, haven't been listening to in ourselves, or that like we haven't gotten what we needed, or we didn't feel seen, for example.
Because I don't want to like. Obviously, I don't want to assume that I understand that people who told me I was too sensitive, that I know what they were thinking. But like I look back at them now and I was like, wow, I've never seen those people be sensitive. And I wonder if they yearned for that in some way, maybe. But maybe that's putting too much on them too, and that's unfair. But it helps me anyway when I'm thinking about it.
I think it can be tough to know. I also... I have a feeling that a lot of the world, a lot of people could, and it can be dangerous, right? Could be more sensitive and more listen more sometimes. Try to seek to understand, and the kind of thing where like you're asking, okay, what are you going through now? Why? let's not immediately like condemn the person with judgment as if like we know exactly like where they're coming from. We know exactly like you're being too sensitive, or it's just trying to relate to each other's people, I guess.
Yeah. So. I love that. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about heavy metal music because I know you're a fan. Mm-hmm. And music is one of my favorite expressions of creativity and also one of my favorite balms for mental health.
Yeah.
Could you talk to me a little bit about the bands that you like and why you dig heavy metal? Like, where does that passion come from?
A couple of the bands that I really like and that I keep going back to and have been going back to over, I don't know, the past, I'm going to say 3/4 of a decade, but that's, I don't know, like between 6 and 8 years, right? I definitely say Behemoth, Opeth. I just like put 3 bands up. It's because Behemoth plays so much so quickly that it seems like there's 2 drummers there.
I love it.
And then oh gosh, Jimi Hendrix will always have a very special place in my heart. Mm-hmm. I started playing drums actually accompanying an extraordinarily gifted guitarist, and we would play Jimi Hendrix tunes.
That's so cool.
And he would just solo nonstop. The brilliance was something to behold and just kind of continually vibe with.
How did you meet them? Or like how did that partnership form or that relationship?
I'd known them for a good amount of time before that. The thing about this person is they also were a really profound like teacher, and they were like not just a good guitarist, but like the breadth and depth of their mind was such that if they try to give an instrument or they try to give an activity, philosophy, physics, math, you name it, their mind could understand and dance with and create in that space, right? And over time, I discovered more heavy metal, right? I started out with the usuals, like, okay, so you got Metallica, some of the originals, to Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, what have you. And then eventually, like, I just knew, like, I wanted to get heavier and heavier. And it's not like there's a heaviest band out there, but after a certain amount of time, like, I discovered Behemoth, and the energy that they have on stage and in, just in their music is incredible. And one thing that spoke to me through them was literally just expressing that intensity, which I feel like we can relate to the nature of sensitivity too. Ooh. Like, sensitivity can be really intense, but then also like both can be stigmatized. You're being too intense, you're being too sensitive. It's like you're expressing too much, but now if you're on the flip side or whatever, the inverse, you're taking in too much, and I don't like it. And like, well, how do you find a middle ground? And I relate, as being somebody who's sensitive. And then also like, it's hard because like people say that they value creativity, right? Mm-hmm. But like, a lot of the time people, and we touched on this in the podcast, only value creativity if it's under a certain kind of description, or if it's only like in a certain kind of way.
Certain umbrella.
Certain umbrella.
Yeah.
But is that really what it means to be creative?
Yeah. That's beautiful. Do you have any songs that, like, for instance, like me, you're just now getting me into heavy metal. I'm new to it. So do you have like a song that you're like, this is the song that I would offer up to listen to if you're curious about heavy metal or experiencing it?
Well,
it's probably really hard to pick one song too, so it's okay.
It's hard to pick one song or one album, but I will. There's some very heavy elements in Jimi Hendrix, obviously not heavy metal, but I always go back to Hey Joe in that context, just because the relationship between the drumming and the guitar and the vocals is so. It's so organic, it's so natural sounding and seamless and beautiful. It's like it's incredibly perfectly orchestrated. So I would say that. And then when it comes to Opeth, I'll always love Harlequin Forest. Actually, the last show that I saw prior to the pandemic was Opeth.
Oh,
I went with a
wow.
really good friend of mine, and they played Harlequin Forest, and I was like, I'm gonna faint. This is amazing. It's really, really good because it showcases like the really heaviness, the growling vocals that are in a lot of metal, but then also the lead singer, he's got tremendously beautiful, clean vocals. It's a great song in various different ways.
Cool.
So
I'm excited to check those out. Let's see. We have a couple things in the chat. Yeah. Thanks for the comments, y'all. We're reading all of them. You're amazing. We appreciate it. Just put it out there too. If there's like any bands or like creative expressions that you're really passionate about that you want to share, throw them in the chat. We'll talk about them. We'll mention them. It's okay if there's nothing to. But yeah, I want to go back to Ben too. We talked about just like watching ourselves pre-recorded.
It's kind of trippy.
Yeah. Well, it was talked about it. I don't think people talk about this a lot. Is like it's really hard to like. I think whatever for me anyway. I'll speak to what I know is whenever I make something and I share it with folks that there's always a vulnerability to that makes me like, well, especially if I'm watching myself, then it's like my overcritical brain begins immediately.
Yes.
And I wish more creators talked about this because I think it's something that most of us have to be experiencing when we make shit.
Yep.
What about you? How was it like for you watching yourself on camera?
It's pretty strange sometimes. I'm definitely not like somebody who goes and gets on camera a whole lot, right? It's just happened that way that like I'd say like the most interesting thing for me is that like it doesn't allow me to be as critical as I usually am because there just isn't time.
Yeah.
So it kind of reminds me, and let me know if this makes sense, but like sometimes if I'm working or in the past when I do homework, I listen to music.
Yeah.
Because like it would put part of my brain that would ordinarily focus on being critical or like over analyzing things, that part of my brain would focus on the music instead.
Yeah.
So I was able to more just like, create or like come up with whatever math or philosophy, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like, in this context, it's definitely different, but it's in a strange way, it's a little bit freeing. I don't, what's it like for you, Kate?
I resonate with that. Yeah, I think that like when you're like for film, I think one of the reasons I like it is that like it does get into that flow state. I really love the comparison to listening to music while studying. I think that's very cool. Yeah, because you're just it's happening. Like you can't stop it. But then like later when you're watching it, you get that's when oh, and this is very cool. I'm seeing. Let's see. I've been learning an instrument as an adult, and it's been very therapeutic. And then Dane asked, "What instrument?" And he said, "Piano." They said, "Piano." That's very cool. Oh,
that's amazing.
Oh, I love that. I resonate with that. I learned ukulele as an adult, and it's one of my favorite mental health habits too. This is very cool.
Well, kudos to you for learning piano and practicing.
Yeah,
getting incrementally better. That's the best.
You're amazing. That's the stuff heroes are made of. I think like something new that you get incrementally better at every day.
Kudos to that. Yeah.
Oh yes, you've been learning uke as well. Woo! Very cool. We should have a uke jam session on the station.
I have a really dear friend who loaned me a uke like a year ago. So shout out to the educator.
Yeah, I started learning because somebody gave me their old uke, and now it's passing on. Oh yeah, great question. Was asked if there's any resources you're using to learn piano. I know for me, I found like uke teacher on YouTube. That's how I was learning. Let's see. I don't know if people like having their names right. So C Bravo is what I'll call you. If you have any tools that you're using to learn in quarantine, let us know too. We can throw that out here. But yeah, I do just want to mention too, we've got about 10 minutes left together.
Time flies
So fast. Y'all are fun. But I just want to mention again, like this community is your community. So even if you're watching this later and you want to leave a comment for us, or you want to edit out a part that you really liked, your feedback is going to shape how this podcast progresses. So we meet every other week. Next session, I'm going to have a death doula with me, and you can connect with Ben on Twitch, but also in our Discord community, which I don't know if it's easy. Maybe we can put an invite to the Discord community, or if maybe everybody is already in it. If you'd like the Discord connection, please just note in the chat. We can get it to you. An Essential Elements book. No, that's very cool. That's not grim at all. That's awesome. Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, I think like learning is learning. And again, to me, it's okay. I can't recommend the Learn to Read Music Fast course at Udemy. I think UDEMY. Oh, cool.
Ooh, shockingly effective.
This is great. So a huge review for the course Learn to Read Music Fast on UDEMY. I don't even know what that is. I'm so excited to check this out. I'm writing it down. I guess I don't need to. It's here. I'm gonna do it anyway. If I don't write things down, I forget them immediately. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it.
Check it out too. Thank you.
Yeah. That's very exciting. Ben, is there anything like for the community, for the Twitch community, that you're really excited to see manifest, or things that you're excited to see grow?
I think so. At the Hope for Us Network, we talk about transforming mental health, being proactive, really listening to ourselves, in order to address, mental health challenges far in advance of the point of crisis. So when it comes to, transforming various levels of mental health care, I think it's really cool to ask, like, what does that mean to each of us? Because we have a unique, to others, like relatively inaccessible window into our own lives, and what we have to say and how we feel really matters. So I'd ask, everybody watching, and, even ask people that, like, what does it mean to transform mental health in your community or as individuals? What would you like to see at different levels of society?
That's beautiful, Ben. Yeah. I love that, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, like this community, I just like I'm really looking forward to conversations.
Yes.
With people who are passionate about mental health and also creativity. I think that's the part I'm most excited about, like seeing develop and like different relationships and like microcosms growing.
Yes.
All surrounding the conversations that you're talking about. I think that's really cool. I'm excited to be here.
Transform how we see creativity.
Yes.
How we see
mental health and each other, right?
Yes.
Like yeah.
Absolutely.
No big deal.
We got this, y'all.
We got this. And it looks like yeah. No, it is. It is how it starts. Yeah. And it looks like Adult Piano Adventures by Hal Leonard is the book my teacher recommended. I've been going through. Ooh, okay, very cool. And I'm gonna write it down again.
I've been learning piano myself. Thank you for that recommendation. Appreciate it. C. Bravo mentioned essential elements above.
Yes, for ukulele. Yeah.
I wonder if there's one of those for piano. There's got to be. There are essential elements of piano. Maybe it's like have you heard of this before?
There has to be. There has to be.
I think like it really resonates with me just from like my own sort of like idiosyncratic philosophical perspective. I want to know what the essential elements are.
Yeah.
In general, so.
Like the anatomy of something almost, and
yes.
Then you can like learn more about each of the pieces. But if you don't know what an arm is, you don't know to practice it.
Yep.
Maybe that's a bit too abstract. I don't know.
I was
Does that make sense?
Gonna say I know we're about to end, but to know the whole thing in order to know the parts, and to know the parts in order to know the whole thing.
Yeah.
A kind of like Gestalt relationship, but that's maybe another conversation.
No, yeah, I think so too. But C. Bravo says yes, there are books for everything via essential elements. Cool.
Woo!
So excited to check that out.
Appreciate you.
Well, y'all, like as we wrap up, if there's any final thoughts that you want to share or things that you'd like to put into the chat, please feel free. Ben, is there anything you'd like to say as we wrap up and close?
Thank you for sharing this space with me, sharing this conversation with me, Kate.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're a wizard and like a true champion of people, and I'm
gotcha.
really excited to be in community with you and to have done this with you. Thank you for being my first guest too, and like
Absolutely.
working through all the things.
It's
You're
an
the
honor.
best. Yeah. Cool. Well, everybody, I think I'm just trying to think. I think that's everything. Oh, one last thing too is if you liked this and you want to share it with folks, please do feel free. This will be an archive here on our Twitch channel. We'd love to see people on the Twitch channel. This is the only place you can watch us on video. But if you like the audio and you'd like to listen to that, there is a link to Anchor as well. I believe that's, yep. Or let's see. There might be a link to Anchor. Dan, if it's easy to share the Anchor link or if it's somewhere and you don't mind to, or maybe I can grab it too real quick. But the podcast will also be on Anchor, or we can also put it in the comments too after we're done with this live sheet as well. Let's see. Oh, thank you so much for the comment. We really appreciated you being here and being in the chat. Thank you. It means a lot.
Thanks for being here, y'all.
Yeah, much love. I hope that you all have a great night. And yeah, thank you. I always feel like I'm hanging up the phone with somebody that I love.
I always feel that way too.
Yeah, like no, you hang up first.
Yeah.
You got
this.
Yeah. Oh, but thanks everybody. I hope that you have a beautiful night.